Does life have any meaning? And if it does, what is the meaning of life? Well, what we can observe is that in today's age, especially in the modern democracies, more and more people are asking that question. It's as if the question is becoming more and more important for more people. And what I've explained in the previous videos in the series is that there was an American psychologist called Maslow, Abraham Maslow, and he created this pyramid of human needs, where at the bottom of this pyramid you have the more like the physiological needs, safety and security, and the need to belong somewhere and to have esteem. But at the top of the pyramid is what he called the self-actualization needs. And what we can see is that there's a progression. So some people are still focused on these more basic needs that relate to the physical body, but more and more people in today's age are going into this top of the pyramid with the self-actualization needs. And once you go into that need for self-actualization, then the question of the meaning of life becomes more important. It's simply a natural progression that happens in the consciousness of human beings and in the collective consciousness. So what we can say is that we are living in an age where more and more people have become aware of the need for self-actualization, finding out who we are, what kind of beings we are. And as a natural result of that, you start thinking about what is the meaning of life. And it's not that people don't think about it at the lower levels of needs, but it changes dramatically when you go into self-actualization. So where do we start considering this question? Well, let's look back. Let's look back and say that for thousands of years, people have, at least some people have, considered what's the meaning of life. And this is actually interesting because it shows you that we have a need to know. In order to function psychologically as human beings, we have to find some answer to the question of what is the meaning of life, what is the purpose, why are we here? And we find it, of course, at different levels, and we can see this, as I said, with the pyramid. You know, people have different ways of dealing with this question. But the very fact that we are asking the question tells us something about ourselves. It tells us, as I've said in the previous videos, that we are experiencers. We are experiencing life. And this experience takes place inside our minds. And we can, as I said previously, we can have experiences without really thinking about it, without really being aware. But there can come a point where suddenly we start thinking, but wait a minute, why am I experiencing life the way I'm experiencing it? Why do I have the life experience I'm having? Is it possible I could change my life experience? And this is very interesting because if you look at it traditionally, Christianity, which many of us grew up with in Western countries, what does Christianity say about the meaning of life? Well, I honestly don't know. I grew up in a Lutheran Christian country. I'm not quite sure what Christianity says is the meaning of life, other than we have to obey an outer religion so we can qualify to go to heaven and avoid an eternity of suffering in hell. I don't know what else they say is the meaning of life. I couldn't really ever figure it out as I was growing up, and therefore the Christian religion didn't have much appeal to me because I needed to know. I had, even as a child, a deep desire to know what is the meaning of life. So traditionally you could say that Christianity takes this approach that it defines what the meaning of life is for everybody, and everybody should accept that the meaning of life is to obey the outer religion and qualify to go to heaven to avoid going to hell. But obviously in the modern age, more and more people can't accept this, which is why many people are abandoning Christianity or looking beyond it. Then the polar opposite we have in the Western societies to Christianity is scientific materialism, which has a very simple way of dealing with the question of the meaning of life because it just defines it out of existence. The question is meaningless according to materialism, because according to materialism, your conscious mind, everything that happens in your conscious mind, all of your thoughts, all of your needs and desires, is a product of unconscious processes in your brain. In other words, what materialism really is saying is that our conscious awareness is an illusion. Our sense that we exist as distinct beings is just an illusion projected by the mind. Now, I know this is difficult to grasp, and I've seen a lot of people, even materialists, who don't understand the consequences of this. But let's just give a simple analogy. Okay? Let's say we're sitting in a movie theater and we are watching a movie. And all of a sudden, one of the characters on the movie screen is saying, "Oh, I have had enough of this. I'm out of here." And it walks out of the picture. And if we experience that, we would have to say, well, that's flat out impossible. Because what happens on the movie screen is just a projection of what happens, the images on the film strip, and they are pre-recorded. They are predetermined. So a character on the movie screen cannot have conscious awareness and free will. It just does whatever is projected from the images on the movie screen. And this is parallel to what materialism is saying. Materialism is saying that your conscious mind, which is the character on the movie screen, doesn't have any freedom to act, doesn't even have conscious awareness. Because everything that happens in your mind is just a projection of the unconscious processes in your brain, in your neurons. So if you believe in materialism, there's no point in thinking about the meaning of life because it can't have any meaning. Because to unconscious neurons, there can be no meaning to life. So what does that mean? Well, it means very simply, we are more than neurons. We are more than our brains. We are conscious beings. We exist as conscious beings. Because if we didn't, why would we even think about the meaning of life? Why would the question even come up in our minds? But it also means we are more than what we are portrayed as in the Christian religion. Because the Christian religion says God created our souls, but God created us as sinners. So, if we accept this view, we would say, okay, the meaning of life then is to be redeemed from our state of sin that God created us in so we can go to heaven. But that also means we shouldn't have any questions about the meaning of life. We should just accept this. We need to be free from sin. We need to do what the Christian religion tells us to do so we can overcome sin. And that's the only meaning there is to life. So why do we have all these questions? Is there a deeper meaning? What could it be? Because we are neither the unconscious beings that materialism portrays us as, nor are we the sinners that Christianity portrays us as. We are more than that. And what I have talked about in my other series of videos called How the World Works is that we are self-aware beings. The core of our identity, the core of our beings is this self-awareness. We have an ability to step back, to actually step back from our physical bodies, even our outer minds, and experience ourselves from the outside, look at ourselves and say, is this how I want to continue living my life? And this is what you do when you go into these self-actualization needs. Self-actualization means actually that you are actualizing the higher potential you have. And this means that you, at some point, you need to step back, look at your life experience and say, so far in my life, I've experienced life a certain way, based on my upbringing, based on the programming from my culture, my family, and society. But is that the only way to experience life? Is it possible that I could consciously change my life experience? And of course it is. That's what I argue in all of my videos, that it is possible. And I'm not the only one saying this. Millions of people throughout history have proven that it's possible to change our life experience deliberately and consciously. And so how this relates to the question of meaning of life is that we were all brought up to look at life a certain way. And that way then determines what we think is the meaning of life. But we have the potential to step back from this and say, is this the only way to look at the meaning of life? Is there a deeper way? Is there a higher way? Is there a more meaningful way to look at the meaning of life? And once you become open to that, there's a lot of options that open up to us. And so let's again step back. Let's look at people. And we can see that people have various ways of dealing with this question of the meaning of life. Some people go into denial about it. They say, I don't need to think about this. I need to focus on the practical aspects of life. Other people go into defining it in various ways. For example, if we take Maslow's pyramid, physiological needs is the basic need. So some people are focused on the needs of the physical body. The meaning of life is to have a secure lifestyle, a comfortable lifestyle, to have your physical needs fulfilled. It could be food, it could be safety, it could be sex, it could be material goods, that you have a materially good lifestyle. There are people who go into the meaning of life is to accumulate as much money and as much material possessions as possible. Others say, well, the meaning of life is to explore how beer affects the human brain, and many other ways that people define this around the physical body. You can step up a little bit higher. You have safety and security needs, where people will say the meaning of life is to have some kind of security. I need to have a certain amount of money in the bank. I need to have physical protection, live in a country that's safe, and so forth and so on. Then there's the love and belonging needs, where for people the meaning of life is to belong to a group, to feel that you're part of that group, and explore what that means. Then you come up to the esteem needs, where the meaning of life is to be part of a group, but to be special within that group, to be seen as special by the other members of the group, whether you have material possessions, more money, whether you can run the 100 meters faster than anybody else and set records, or in whatever way people define it. Now, I'm not in any way condemning this. I'm just observing that these are some of the ways that people deal with the meaning of life based on Maslow's pyramid. But then comes the self-actualization needs, which is what I'm personally interested in, because I've been at that level all of my life, thinking about the meaning of life in relation to myself. And what is the meaning of life? Well, we could say, of course, generally, that there comes that point where suddenly the meaning of life becomes self-actualization, actualizing yourself. But what does that mean? It means different things to different people. It actually means different things at different levels. Because what I've explained in my previous videos is that there are levels of possible states of consciousness. We human beings can rise, we can consciously and deliberately rise to higher and higher levels of consciousness. And as we rise to higher levels, the way we look at the meaning of life will change. So now I'm going to draw a little bit on what I've said in my How the World Works videos, because this will give us a different perspective on the meaning of life. What I have said is that we come into being, we come into existence with a point-like sense of identity, a very narrow sense of who we are. I compared it to you're standing on this flat plane, it's completely dark, and you have a little flashlight. And your flashlight lights up a little circle around yourself. And that's your sense of self that we start out with. And then our potential is to raise our consciousness to higher levels or to go to lower levels. And so I've also in my videos talked about there are 144 levels of consciousness, from the lowest to the highest. And when we come into being as a new being, we come in at the 48th level of consciousness, which is a level of consciousness where we have an intuitive sense that we are connected to something outside our own minds. In other words, we have 4 levels of the mind, as I've described. There's the highest, which is our sense of identity. There's the mental level, which is our thoughts. The emotional level, which is our feelings, and then the level of the mind that's connected to the physical body, the brain and the nervous system. So we have contents that we have created in these levels of the mind. And it's through these contents that we experience the world we're in. Everything that comes to us from the outside is filtered through the contents of these 4 levels of the mind. But at the 48th level, we have a sense that we are connected to something outside our own minds. And ultimately, that's our higher selves, which exists in a higher realm, a higher energy spectrum. And so the choice we have is we can expand our sense of connection to our higher self, whereby we become more and more connected, more and more intuitive, eventually attaining a sense of oneness with our higher self. And that's one direction we can go in. But we can also go in the other direction. We can go below the 48th level and go towards the lowest levels of consciousness. And what I explain is that we have been given completely free will. There is nobody forcing us. There's no force on us whatsoever. We start at the 48th level. We have a sense that we can expand our connection to something outside our minds. But there's no force that we have to choose that path. We can also choose to go into the levels below the 48th level, which is the consciousness of separation, where when we go to the 47th level, we lose our intuitive sense that we are connected to something outside our own minds. Our minds become closed systems, self-validating, self-referential systems. There is nothing outside of our mind that we can compare our beliefs, our worldview, our mental images of the world to. So the way we do this, as I've explained, is we go into what I call the duality consciousness, where we define, or we allow someone else to define for us, 2 polarities. There's one that's true, one that's false, one that's good, one that's evil. And so what we do is we create a certain worldview. And just to give an example of this, we take a particular religion and we say this religion gives us the truth about how life works. And in our minds, we then create certain beliefs, I've called them subconscious selves, that are meant to validate and uphold that worldview that we have. And then this worldview is defined, it has an opposite, or it has many opposites. Anything that doesn't validate the worldview is false, it's bad, it's of the devil, it's evil. And this means we can now go into this state of mind where when we lose our sense of connection and think we are separate beings, we think we can do something to other people and get away with it. In other words, the basic motto of all religions is do unto others what you want them to do to you. But when we go into separation, we lose our awareness of this. So we think that we can do unto others and it doesn't affect ourselves. Really what religions are saying, do unto others because whatever you do to others will affect yourself. It'll affect your life experience, it'll affect your circumstances in life. But when we go into separation, we forget this or we ignore it. We think we can find ways around it. You can see this very clearly in the Crusades, where Christians and Muslims, 2 groups, both believed they had the superior religion, the one true religion. But both of them recognized the Old Testament, which says, thou shalt not kill. But still in the Crusades, they had found ways within their religion to justify why they were actually doing God's work by killing the people from the opposite group. And this shows you, in a nutshell, what the duality consciousness is all about. You are not seeking to find out how does the world work. You are defining how the world should work, and then you are only looking for what validates your worldview. And anything that threatens your worldview, you find ways to discount because it's of the devil, we don't need to consider it. Or many other ways. So what I'm saying here is that we are beings, self-aware beings who have been given free will. We have the right to explore whatever can be done with free will. And one of the ways to explore what can be done with free will is to go below the 48th level of consciousness, go into this illusion that we are separate beings, use the duality consciousness to justify our viewpoints, justify whatever we want to do, whatever experience we want to have, whatever life experience we want to have, we can justify it with this duality consciousness. And that is one aspect of exploring what free will is. So what does that mean relating to the meaning of life? It means that once you go into this state of separation, the meaning of life is whatever you define it as. So this leads us to the point where we can now ask a question. Is there some objective, universal meaning of life? Or is the meaning of life, the answer to the question of what is the meaning of life, is it entirely subjective? And what we can realize now is that when we go into this state of separation, it's an illusion because we can never be separated. Everything is connected at an energetic level, as science has proven. But when we go into this state of separation, we are literally defining what the meaning of life is. You may say, well, we don't do this personally necessarily. No, but when you accept a certain worldview, be it a religion, be it Marxism, communism, materialism, whatever it is, you are accepting that your worldview, your ideology, defines the meaning of life. But you may also define it personally and say the meaning of life for me is this. For example, the meaning of life in some people's mind is to have the maximum amount of power you can have on earth. That's why they become dictators. They want maximum power over other people. Some people want to leave a legacy on history, be seen as a very important person in history, and so forth and so on. A lot of ways to define it. So what we can say is that when you are at this level, below the 48th level of consciousness, into separation, the meaning of life is whatever you define it as. Because however you define the meaning of life, that gives you a certain life experience. And at this level, the only way you grow is by having the life experience you want to have, the life experience you have defined for yourself, and having it for so long that you eventually decide, I've had enough of this. There must be a higher life experience. And that's when you can then begin to consider, is there an objective meaning to life at this level? In other words, you see all of the people who are in duality, they are defining their own meaning of life. The meaning of life is to be a good Christian and kill all the Muslims who are against Christianity. The meaning of life is to be a good Muslim and kill all the Christians who are working against Allah's purposes. And many other ways to do this, right? And you can see that these people, their minds, as I said, are closed systems. They are self-referential, self-validating. You cannot argue with them. You cannot reason with them. You cannot talk them out of it. Okay? I have in my life met fundamentalist Christians. I have tried to have a conversation with them, and I realized there really is nothing I could say. The same goes for many other people I met. I realized there's nothing I can say here because whatever I say that contradicts their worldview, they will just reject it outright or they'll ignore it. They will find ways to justify why they don't need to think about it. And I'm not saying this that they should live their life based on how I see life. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying their minds are closed. There's no way they are open to what I have said earlier. We can step back from our life experience and look at it and say, do I want to continue to have this life experience or do I want to change it? People who are in separation, they're not open to that. They think there's only one way to have a life experience and that's the way I'm having it. And so at this level, it's what I call the school of hard knocks. You are constantly projecting out that you have the highest worldview, the highest truth. But there are other people who have a different worldview than yours. So there's constant conflict, there's constant tension, and this is what creates the hard knocks. That leads to wars, it leads to atrocities, it leads to suffering, all kinds of things. But nevertheless, people are not open to changing their life experience, so they need to continue having that life experience until they've had enough of it, and now they open their minds, is there something higher? So what I'm trying to get to with all of this is that at this level, there's a myriad of individual subjective definitions of what the meaning of life is. But if you step back from all of this, you can see that objectively, the purpose of all this is that people have been given the opportunity to explore what you can do with free will, where you can either see yourself as a connected being or a separate being. And as a separate being, you are defining what the meaning of life is. And the only way you are going to get out of that is that you continue having enough hard knocks, enough suffering, enough experiences of what this does to you, that you become willing to question it. So at this point, really, you see a lot of people on earth, right? And you can look at them and you can say, well, they're in this state of mind. And the meaning of life for them is that they continue to be in this state of mind. They continue to act out that state of mind, perhaps even act it out in more and more extreme ways, as I've argued in one of my videos about whether the world is getting worse or better. Because what's happening in our time is that people are becoming more and more extreme, more and more polarized, and this is part of the outplaying of this school of hard knocks. The knocks become harder and harder because people are being more confrontational with each other. And the objective purpose of this is that people come to this point where they've just had enough of the struggle. The Buddha, 2,500 years ago, in the first noble truth, defined life as a struggle. But life is really only a struggle when you are in this state of separation, where you are constantly creating the hard knocks for yourself. And so the objective meaning of life at this level is that people come to the point where they become open to the very simple fact they've forgotten. And that very simple fact is we are self-aware beings. We can step back from our current life experience and ask, could I have a higher life experience? And when you become open to this, that's when you can start working your way up to the 48th level of consciousness again. However far you descended below it, not everybody needs to descend to the lowest level. And at the 48th level, you reignite your intuition. You reconnect to something outside your own mind. And that's when you can start walking a gradual path that takes you one step at a time up from the 48th level towards the 96th level, where you have pulled yourself above the collective consciousness, and now you start really having a much clearer connection to your higher self and to your spiritual teachers. So we can say here that there is a phase between the 48th and the 96th level where the meaning of life really is to explore what self-actualization means, to explore who you are, what kind of being you are, what can you do as an individual being in relation, or in actually not really in relation to the mass consciousness, but rather you're pulling yourself above the mass consciousness. You are saying, instead of just following the trends in my group that I was brought up with, what can I do as an individual? How can I explore my individuality, not as a separate being where I do whatever I want regardless of the consequences for others, but I explore what it means to be an individual who is connected to something higher than myself, so that I don't harm other people, but I'm still exploring what can I do that other people in my group or even in humanity have not yet been willing to do. Can I climb to higher levels of consciousness? Can I attain some knowledge that people don't have? Can I attain certain abilities that people don't have? That's what you explore between the 48th and the 96th level. So you can say at that level, the meaning of life really is growth. It's an expansion of consciousness. This means partly expansion of knowledge, but it's not just about knowledge. It's not just about acquiring intellectual knowledge. It's more a matter of shifting your consciousness upwards. And it's simply that you can say, as an example of what it means to shift your consciousness, is that you can come to a point where you realize that what's important for me is not all the outer things. Whether I have so much money in the bank or a big house or a fancy car or this or that is no longer important to me. What is important to me is, what is my personal potential? Who am I? What is my state of consciousness? And there comes a point where it becomes important for you to pull yourself above this state of suffering that most people are in. where you realize that I want more to life than this suffering. And what does it take? And that's when you start focusing on raising your consciousness, being willing to look at what is it that pulls people into the struggle. What are these, as I've explained in many of my videos, these subconscious selves we have that are constantly pulling us into reacting a certain way. So in other words, as part of this process of self-actualization, we also become open to looking at ourselves. And you look at, what is it in my psychology? What patterns do I see? Why am I reacting certain ways when people do or say this? And you see how this limits you, because you can't choose your reaction to situations. You're just pulled into subconsciously reacting to situations. So you free yourself from these reactionary patterns. You come to a point where you are mastering your own psychology because you are choosing how to react. There may be somebody who is trying to push your buttons, but you are saying, I don't have to react this way. I can choose a positive reaction rather than a negative reaction. And so this is part of this whole growth process when you grow up to the 96th level. And then at the 96th level, you attain a different perspective. And you realize that there is an end goal to this growth that's possible on Earth, the growth in consciousness. And it's not just to continue to raise your sense of self and become more and more sophisticated, to know more and more, and to have abilities that other people have. That's not really what it's about. What it is about is two things. First of all, you have a life plan. You created a life plan before you came into embodiment. And it involves the growth you want to go through, but it also involves what you want to do, what kind of a contribution you want to make to the world, to your society, to your family, what you can do for others, what you can do for the whole. And when you start having a more clear vision of that, all of a sudden the meaning of life shifts. The meaning of life is to uncover what are the goals I put in my life plan and how can I fulfill them? How can I manifest them? If you have a certain amount of growth, there are certain things in your psychology you want to overcome, you focus on that, you become very dedicated to exposing whatever it is in your psychology and overcoming it. And as I've explained in many of my videos, you can overcome anything in your psychology. Because again, we have free will, and we have created the limitations in our psychology, and we can uncreate what we have created. So this is one thing. The other thing could be you become very focused on making a positive contribution to society. But there's a third option that opens up for you at that level, and that is that you can continue your growth towards the highest level possible on Earth, which is the 144th level. And when you reach that level, you can make that last choice to leave Earth behind, to leave planet Earth behind. You don't need to reincarnate here. You can ascend permanently from Earth. So you do not have to come back. And as you move above the 96th level, closer to the 144th level, that becomes more and more important to you. So you can say that the meaning of life shifts to the point where you begin to see, yes, this is my goal. Now, this doesn't apply to everybody. There may be people who can go, or there are people who go above the 96th level and they realize, but it's not my plan to ascend after this lifetime. My plan is to reincarnate and to help bring in a better age. I've explained in some of my videos that the Ascended Masters, especially a master called Saint Germain, has a plan for the next 2,000 years of bringing the Earth into a golden age with an enormous amount of progress, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of the development of society, more freedom, more personal growth, and so forth. So many of the people who are open to this path to higher levels of consciousness, we have it as a part of our life plan to contribute to bringing the Earth towards that golden age. And it has, of course, already been brought closer to it in many nations. Many of the modern democracies are closer to it than many other nations are. But the world is moving slowly, gradually up towards that level. And the way to manifest that better age is that people reach a level of consciousness where they can tune into the Ascended Masters and receive the ideas for how to improve life in a certain way. And this might very well be, when you get to that level, might be the meaning of life for you for a long time, where the meaning of life is to educate yourself, become an expert in a specific area of society, tune in intuitively, and receive these ideas of how to bring progress in that area. So that's another way to look at the meaning of life. So ultimately, if it is your goal to ascend after this lifetime, then there comes a point where the meaning of life really becomes to ascend, to qualify. And that means letting go of any attachments, any selves you have here on earth. Any sense that there's something you want to do, that you have to do, that you haven't finished. You have to come to a point where you can stand there, you are looking back at earth, and is there anything that's pulling on you? Is there anything that's pulling you down there that you haven't finished, that you feel you have to do? And if there is, then of course you can reincarnate again. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it is your goal to ascend, then you have to look at this, overcome these attachments to where you can look at it and you can say with Jesus, the prince of this world cometh and has nothing in me. I've also talked about the final initiation of the Buddha, where the demons of Mara were parading before him, trying to pull him into reacting, trying to pull him into thinking there was something he couldn't leave behind on earth. So there comes that point where the meaning of life really becomes to move on, to ascend and become an ascended being. And once you ascend, a whole different realm of possibility opens up to you, because now there are infinite potential for growth in awareness in the ascended realm. And as I've explained in my videos, there are many levels of the ascended realm that you can work your way up through, and you can eventually reach the highest level of consciousness possible in our world of form, which is the creator consciousness, where you become a creator. And you could say that if there is an objective meaning to creation, you can say that there is an ultimate being, the creator, which has a much, much higher level of consciousness than we do, a level of consciousness we can't fathom when we are unascended. And this being has created the entire world as an educational institution to educate other creators. So that you start with a point-like sense of self, you gradually expand your sense of self, raise your sense of self, until you reach the same level of consciousness as your source, as your origin. It says in the Bible, I'm a jealous God, but that may apply to the Old Testament God, but it doesn't apply to the Creator, because the Creator's ultimate goal and fulfillment is that to see that a being started out with that point-like sense of identity and has now reached the same level of awareness as the Creator. That, in a sense, is the ultimate meaning of life, to continue to raise your consciousness until you reach that level. And then at that level you have other options which are so beyond what we can really fathom on earth that there's really no point in thinking about it. Once you get there, you'll know what to do about it, and you don't need to know about it before you're there, because you can't really do it anyway. So I hope this has given you at least a perspective that there are different levels of the meaning of life. And just, I know that most people who have made it to this point of the video won't really think that way, but I just want to make clear, it's not my purpose here to try to persuade anybody or to convert anybody to a particular viewpoint. I accept free will. The meaning of life will be whatever you can fathom at your present level of consciousness, and that's perfectly fine. You need to live your life based on your present level of consciousness. I'm only hoping that I can show you that it's possible to raise your level of consciousness. And as you do, the way you look at the meaning of life naturally shifts. It's not that you are persuaded or converted. It's not that you suddenly come to believe something. It's not a matter of believing. It's just a matter of how do you look at life and what suddenly seems obvious. I mean, I look back at my life and I can see the people I grew up with, my family, classmates in school, they weren't open to considering the meaning of life. They were not as curious as I was. And they have lived their whole lives in an entirely different way than I have. And that's perfectly fine. But for me, that just wasn't enough, because it was always obvious to me there has to be more. There has to be a deeper meaning to life than this. And it was not something anybody made me believe. It was not something I believed. I just sensed it intuitively. And as I have pursued that path of raising my consciousness, all of a sudden it's just something opens up and you see something, a different perspective, and you see a higher meaning to life, and you say, oh yeah, that's obvious. That's how it is. Now, what often happens to us is that the first time we have one of these experiences where we see something new, we think, oh, now I've seen the ultimate truth. And I had that myself when I was 18. I thought, now I discovered the truth that was hidden for me as I was growing up. But I have since then had several of these experiences where suddenly I broke through, I saw something I hadn't seen before. And it's not that what I saw when I was 18 was completely wrong, but it was just this little circle of a greater reality. And then I saw a bigger circle, and then I saw a bigger circle, and I don't think I've seen the ultimate yet. I'm just trying to say, we can have these important breakthroughs on the path, where suddenly we see something, and it's obvious to us that it's real. But it's always wise not to fall into thinking we've now reached some ultimate level. We have to be open, or at least I think it's important to be open. There could be more to discover. And that's all I'm saying. So wherever you are at, whatever you can accept about the meaning of life, there could be more to discover.